where the Treasurer would not even name the budget deficit. He wouldn't say what it was. Can you imagine? It's like giving a financial report and not saying what the bottom line was. It's exactly that. They did not want to say what the deficit was. And then as the days went on, you saw that interview on Lateline where Kevin Rudd was asked what the debt would be. A perfectly reasonable question. Now, I have been interrogated by Tony Jones on many occasions, he's often asked me questions that I regard as being less than sporting. But it is not unreasonable to ask a Prime Minister, well, what will the debt peak at? That is a perfectly reasonable question. And I was watching Rudd being interviewed in Adelaide. I was down in Adelaide and watching on television. And I saw him starting to talk round and round and round, and I thought, what's going on? Has he had a mental block? Has he actually forgotten it? No. Couldn't possibly have forgotten that. No, can't be right. And then I realised he does not want to say $300 billion. And so that night and for days after, they'd say, what is the debt going to be? He and Mr Swan would go on, and they'd finally say, the number is 300. Well, 300 what? 300 cutlets. 300 hard hats. You never know. And it wasn't until the end of the week that finally, it's like drawing teeth. They were compelled to say it was going to be $300 billion. In fact, $315 billion. And that whole week was just one of spin after the budget was. Kevin Rudd wandering around the country every night, popping up with one of those safety vests and a hard hat. What was he trying to do? Was he trying to impersonate Bob the Builder? Or was he auditioning for a part in the Village People? It was very hard to say. It certainly created quite an impression. The challenge that we face, my friends, is that we are likely to inherit after the next election, which we will win. We'll win the next election. We will inherit the worst set of public finances Australia has ever had. And we will inherit them after a Labor government, only 3 years before, inherited the best set of public finances Australia has ever had. The scale of this transformation, as I said a moment ago, is not just unprecedented, it is unimaginable. Unimaginable. Not even the most fervent Liberal supporter with the direst views about Labor's economic incompetence would have predicted things could have been managed as badly as this. Let us just reflect. This is a government that just in the last few weeks has borrowed $14 billion, another $14 billion, and given it away. Given it away, $900 cheques. It's gone to all sorts of people. Some of them are no longer with us. Either they're living overseas or they're deceased. There are people, there have been anomalies across the board. Some people have reduced their income levels by salary sacrifice so they can get it. Some people on very low incomes who probably could have done with an extra $900 weren't eligible. It is just a mess. And the issue is not whether it went to this person or that person. The fact is, we shouldn't have been spending money like this at all. The Australian people... Australian people expect a government that borrows $14 billion and spends it at a time like this to have something to show for it. We have had nothing to show for it. Do you know that $23 billion in total cash splashes that they have given away would be enough to complete the duplication, dual carriageway, to complete it from Brisbane to Sydney to Melbourne to Adelaide? Think of that. Think of what you could do with $23 billion. And what did we get for the cash political gesture from Mr Rudd, hasn't created a single job, hasn't done anything for Australian industry, for Australian productivity, and certainly hasn't done anything for infrastructure. Now, I'll just talk a little bit about an important infrastructure issue, with particular importance to regional Australia. As you know, one of my great passions is water, and I was very fortunate to be put in charge of water policy by John Howard for 2 years, first as his parliamentary secretary and then as the Minister for Environment and Water Resources. And we introduced in the last government the single biggest reform in our nation's history in the field of water. The National Plan for Water Security was genuinely revolutionary because it in effect corrected an error that had been made in the 1890s when our founding fathers, in their wisdom, had decided not to place the control of interstate waters under the jurisdiction of the new to-be-formed federal government. South Australians naturally had argued very strongly for that, and the other states had said no. Now, that was a mistake in the 1890s. How could you set it right? For years, people said it was in the too hard basket. And I remember quite a few years ago, Bill Heffernan and I, in fact, were talking about this, and we both thought it was something that should be taken out of the too hard basket. But we needed a Prime Minister, and we needed a party, and we needed to be in government to have the courage to do it. And John Howard provided that commitment, and we legislated in the Commonwealth Water Act of 2007 to place the control, the water planning of interstate water in the Murray-Darling Basin under the control of a federal authority. But in addition to that, we put $10 billion on the table to enable us to re-plumb rural Australia. Because the object of this exercise of getting our water planning right, and there's been so many terrible mistakes made over the years, and many of you have heard me talk about that in the past. But the real object is, in addition to that, to re-plumb rural Australia so we can produce more food with less water. That's the whole objective. And so the bulk of the money we allocated was to go into lining irrigation channels, piping water instead of running it through open leaky channels, through having better systems of irrigation on farms, subsoil dripper tapes rather than flood irrigation, a whole host of measures that enabled us to make more food and fibre with less water. In other words, to achieve greater water security, both in terms of agriculture and the environment, and also to achieve greater food security. That was the big vision. That was the big vision, a revolutionary one. Something that had been in the too hard basket for over 100 years. It took the Liberal Party to take it out. We left that to Kevin Rudd. The legislation was passed. He had everything. All the hard political work had been done. And what he has done is he has rolled over to the states. He's rolled over to Victoria in particular. He has not spent money on infrastructure. Hardly any money has been spent on improving irrigation infrastructure. And he is spending and boasting of spending hundreds of millions of dollars to buy water entitlements that, because of the drought, actually involve virtually or hardly any water at all. He's currently spending a lot of money buying a lot of air in dams. And he's reducing the area of irrigated agriculture dramatically. The more water you buy up, the less irrigated agriculture there will be in the future, the less food and fibre we'll produce.